So, welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Tonight is Comprehensivist Wednesdays. Comprehensivist Wednesdays is actually done in conjunction with the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society, and for which I am an organizer of. And tonight, we're going to be looking for your feedback on past Comprehensivist Wednesdays topics. We've had a lot of different topics, a lot of different presenters. And for 5 minutes, if you could just provide, some feedback and it can be actually any topic that the 52 Living Ideas that anybody has presented on. It doesn't have to necessarily be just Comprehensivist Wednesdays. And if you can present for 5 minutes, and I will let you know. And if you have to go a little bit longer than 5 minutes, that's fine. But I'll let you know at 5 minutes that, to wrap it up. And if anyone who wants to present could go ahead and type exclamation point in the chat and line up, and we can get an order to go, and we could start with our presentations. Jody, thank you.
I was getting a little nervous. And I said, okay, before I get too nervous that nobody's taking over, I might as well. So I'm going to speak about my take on Kindergarten Chats and Other Writings by Louis H. Sullivan, which is on Saturdays. Is everybody okay with that?
Absolutely. Thank you.
So I will say one thing, that is one thing to read a book, and other thing to deliver the message to the audience in a very perfect emotions, intonations, and accuracies. That is what was done by, what's her name? It will come to me. Maritza, Shelley, Robin, Robbie, and Rupali, and Jora. And I would say kudos to them because they did an excellent job in explaining everything that was in the book, which is a complicated book. So having said that, I would like to tell you a bit about the book. Louis Sullivan's guidance book, it informs in the form of a dialogue between Sullivan's postgraduate student who has completed his coursework. Sullivan wants the student uh, to learn to think anew by returning to kindergarten, the form step by step from the experience guide. So he's the experience guide, and the student is novice. The guidance Sullivan wishes to impart is not at all technical. He is unconcerned with teaching his student about the finer points of drafting blueprints and constructing skyscrapers. He is teaching on the worldwide views, and instead, every building like you see is an image. He tells him every building that you see is an image of a man whom you do not see. Sullivan tells his students the man is the reality and the building is his offspring. In short, you are what you make. So the things you make are a reflection of who you are. If the architect wishes to build beautiful and functional building, they must first understand certain things about themselves. So Sullivan illustrates about the values. His illustration of the values is profound. And values, he says, are crudely expressed in the terms of dollars and cents. But in general sense, in the community, there are certain values which money cannot and does not measure. Certain services rendered of which money do not impelling cause, or the mechanism of exchange, or the standard of estimate. And it is tacitly felt and recognized that such services are of great and positive value to the community. that they add to its wealth if wealth is taken into broad comprehensive sense. All real values are subjective. All objective values are unreal. They dissolve under analysis into subjective values, and the residuum, if I can read my own handwriting, if ever we reach to it, it is not man-made, but what nature gives, is what nature gives and never objective. It resolves itself step by step. So I'm going to read something that really caught my attention. And on the page 34, it says, so all the real values are subjective. So if so, what is your value outside your bank account? Who values you and why? What are you good for? When you are sifted down and your externals are removed, what are you worth? What have you ever done? What can you do? Who are you? What are you? What are you on earth? Do you think if you were an architect, you would be more or less valuable than you are? If so, why? What are you? What is an architect? What is a building? What is a dollar? Answer me these things and let me weigh your answer in the scale I hold in my hand, a scale in which I ask only that you balance 1 little milligrams of humanity. Are these questions fair or are they not? Are they in order or are they not? Are they practical or are they not? Are they economical or they are not? Are they social or are they not? Are they democratic or they are not? You may think about these things at your leisure. The buildings are there for good and for ill, they will never run away. They cannot conveniently avoid investigation. And if the building is there, the architect is there with it. He cannot escape either. Little by little, we will ferret him out. There is no hurry. So very good. But tell me, when you say the value of a building, do you really lay more emphasis on the subjective value than on the dollar value? And he says, oh, both. For human nature determines the subjective value, sooner or later becomes money value, and the lack of it sooner or later money loss. The subjective value is far the higher, by far the more permanent, but money value is inseparable from the affairs of life. To ignore it would be moonshine.
Beautifully put, and timing was perfect. So thank you for getting us started this evening. And that is actually one of the, I couldn't agree with you more with, they're doing the panel, Shelley, Maritza, Joya, that they're actually doing an incredible job of explaining an incredibly complex book and topic. So I'm sure we'll revisit that. And I very much appreciate you going first. So thank you. I know how that feels. Laura, you're next. Oh, you're muted.
I think what I said resonates with me very strongly from these talks. I find that hearing these things, I've really has woken me up to really trying to begin to examine myself in many different ways, because I feel I've been trying to, put myself together. I mean, or to create myself, from the period where I lost like about almost 2 years of my life, and came back and felt I was a different person, and it was. And I couldn't really, I was told not to think about who I was and not to think about who I want to be, but just who I am today. And I didn't really have a good answer. And what I constructed was somewhat based on, what I remembered about things that I did. And I could identify, I was a stoic and a polymath. And so those things were really good for me. And I like systems. and form and function. And so those became sort of a groundwork for me in this process of development. But these last weeks, where we're really studying sort of much more of our personal characteristics, it's been an awakening for me. And I can't, because of the way my brain works, I know what I heard, and I feel like osmosis occurred. It's in my system, and I'm working on it, but I can't go back and tell you exactly what I've learned, because it's not accessible for me to put out of my head again, or out of my mouth, I'm sorry to say. But I really feel that it's changed me. It's helping me to develop. It's exciting for me, interesting, a little bit frightening. And, I sort of figured at my age, what the heck, I don't have to, why bother trying to think about myself? But it's really been a stimulant. And I'm really grateful for being involved in this and being able to listen to some really bright minds, give their opinion every week about things. And it's really helped me to grow very much as an individual. And I just really feel grateful to Shirkant for doing this, and for all of you to participate as you do every night of the week in these things, because you're coming all the time and providing input. It's really fabulous, because each of you provides some window through which I can look, and you're all there, so I can count on hearing the pieces, and it really helps me to solidify some of these ideas that I've been developing through that. So I thank everybody, and and thank you for reading that passage, because that was really exactly where I feel I have to be asking those questions now and giving answers if I can. And that's what I have to say for now.
Well, and thank you for that contribution, Laura. I feel the same way. And I know that Shrikant always says it's more about the participants and how it makes it a communal experience. And it's never just the presenter, it's also the participants. So you're showing up, it really is helpful to everyone. And so thank you for sharing those thoughts. I have Kevin, and then I have Aiden after that. And I know Nari does want to go at some point.
But it's not, we discussed.
That's fine.
Yeah, can you share that link? I cannot find.
Yeah, I enabled your share screen, but I'll go ahead and share that.
Yeah, you can share for me.
Okay.
Cannot find.
Let me see. Hang on 1 second. Okay. Can everybody see the screen?
And you go, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, can you slide down until the amazing pass above alpha and stone? Okay, perfect. Oh, a little up. The title just, yeah, a little bit up. Okay. Yes. Oh, my topic is inspired by we take for granted. Then I think, what do we take for granted? So I made a topic called Amazing Past about alpha, which is the letter A, and stone in Stone Age. Life is a precious gift we often take for granted until it is threatened. Can we imagine to live 200 years ago or 20-some years ago? Life without machines, lights, cars, planes, phones, internet would be unmoving and dull. So next, I'm going to connect back to the first letter A. Where's it come from? Why originally they use ox head? Try strictly A. Joseph, you can slide a little bit to see the whole picture about A. Yeah, you skip that. I'm going to do it on my own screen. Okay. You may see this picture before. I cannot find a real source. Alpha means ox by or adjacent Semites. It was converted to alpha by the Greeks or Roman. Then connected with Semitic base. That means house from the letter B. It formed the alphabet in English. The first letter doesn't type all of a sudden. So letter A, you see the picture of the put 4, it's 1900 BC. They look at ox head that way. Then the Semitic is 200 years later. Then about 100 BC to 700 BC, this look like today. So here's my question. You can move down. Can we name something you take for granted? Air, sun, food, and water, house, and time. So we know since the Industrial Revolution, last 200 years, pollution and climate change and so on. It's the next question, is those evolution stories incomplete? Is something we missing? If there's something missing, what's this missing links? So I'm going to move to my next story is for the stone. Connect back to the Stone Age. They use stone, folks. It's back to you can move slightly a bit to see the picture. Yeah, Stone Age is 99% of human history. It's lasting from 2.6 million years ago to about 500 years ago. I take this picture is from American Museum of Natural History. It's about the Peking man, a human ancestor who lived in China between roughly the 200,000 and 750,000 years ago. Was a woodworking and fire. They can use fire, spears to hunting the animals. A form of Homo erectus appear to have been quite meticulous about their clothing. They use leaves, cover, and use stone tools to soften and depress animal hides. It's a picture. There used to be the 5 head. It's I guess this picture took from original one of a museum in China. However, during the World War II, they're missing, lost, because when Japan invaded China, they try to hide those original plans going to export via marine, export to US. However, they didn't make up, so they lost. So you can slide next. Next is self-inquiry about our past. In 1776, 1760, Britain started industry revolution. There are 6 years until now, which is 0.01% of whole human history. In past 30 years, the change is faster than we can catch it up. The personal computer industry was introduced of IBM PC on October 12, 1981. And a personal computer started, yeah, that's same. And internet got popular in 1990s. Actually, my major is computer science. I didn't touch computer until in university, use a lab. It's about that period, 1990s. We moved to digital age now, and social media, smartphone, social good, like smart wear clothing. The future will blow our minds. Things are not slowed down. However, can we control what we are going to? That's my question for myself, for our audience and folks leave this earth. What are quality life metrics for human beings? It's money or economic, politics control? Yeah, that's end my talk for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that is very much in line with a couple of different talks that we had covered here at 52 Living Ideas on Comprehensivist Wednesdays as well. Some related to the Center for Digital Life, if I'm getting that acronym correctly, and about how digital will be impacting our lives. And as well as it goes back to the 102 great ideas with the idea of change, and how do we manage change and how do we evolve? So both of those ideas actually relate nicely back to past topics. And so thank you very much for that presentation. And I'm sure that we'll have some questions and we'll try and address some of your questions that you'd raised during your presentation. I have Aiden next.
Hi, thanks, Joseph. This is my first time at this group, and I'm noticing the thing I'm excited most is to talk about what's been brought up already. So maybe the best thing is to wait until
until a few more people go. You would like to wait, or
are we going to do breakout rooms?
We weren't going to do breakout rooms this evening, no, because of the number, and we were just basically going to circle back actually once everybody's done presenting and kind of revisit what anybody has, basically covered, and be able to ask each other questions.
Okay, so let's see. Maybe I'll just say a couple of things while I have the talking stick. Fascinated by this Sullivan topic that Jody brought up. I got to go back and watch that and perhaps read, because I've been in such a Jungian bubble recently, studying so much Carl Jung that's kind of become such a focus for me. But I was so intrigued how much I related to what was shared about that, and also even what Kevin was sharing. And this idea that man is reality. Will you finish that phrase, Jyoti? Man is reality, and the building is, what did you say? I can't hear you.
Hey.
Man is the reality, and the building is an offspring.
Yes, yeah. I was just struck by that. This idea of values and the idea of man being the reality and the building as the offspring. This is what's been on my mind, and it's probably related to my own talk, unfortunately. So this might be a little solipsistic, but I'm going to jump in with the Jungian topic here. And this idea of man being the reality. So, and this sort of idea of subjectivism versus, objective reality, particularly in terms of values, like you brought up, Jody. What I've learned recently that's been on my mind is this reflection on that fact. If you say that man is the reality, And what we create is a product of the psyche in terms of ideas like language, like letters, like Kevin brought up, or, or in terms of buildings, like Jody brought up. It's sort of this sense of we live in this world that we've created and conceive of it as this objective external thing. But where did it come from? On some level, through us, it happened. So what I'm finding so intriguing about this train of thought is, what I'm finding is as we go further back into our history, or I'm experiencing this anyways, there's this schism that starts at some point as we become more scientifically minded, where we become more influenced by the Enlightenment. You go back far enough, and it's like astrology and astronomy are together. Early astronomers were astrologists. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that the inner world was not quite so separate from the outer world. So early astronomers, when they looked at the stars, were seeing the Earth, at the planets even, conceived of them as having the mythological qualities that we associated with the mythological gods at that time. That's why they have these names: Jupiter, Saturn, yada yada yada. Has nothing to do with what's going on in the planets. It's a projection of the human psyche into the cosmos. And from that projection into the cosmos, at some point we got a little more scientifically minded, and and astronomy was born. Similarly with alchemy, and similarly with numbers. I mean, the further you go back, there's a fusion of this inner state and outer state. What happens in the psyche is being played out in front of us without the distinction that those two things are separate. So in other words, internal and external reality are less separated the further back we go, it seems to be. And an interesting reference point for this recently I've noticed is information processing theory, where it's sort of, this is the point that I'll end with. It's like we use, in some cases, the computer to explain how the brain works. Okay, where did the computer come from? The computer came from the human brain. So we generate this system of hardware and software and then say, this is how the brain works, as if there's some sort of objective computer that exists out there independent of the human mind. The human mind is what made it's a very intriguing thought to me that we can build a computer and then use that as a reference point for how the brain works. We're the ones that generated that reference point. And where I find this to be particularly intriguing is lately I've been studying alchemy. That's kind of why I bring up astronomy, and these things all kind of intersect when you go back into history, and number theory, and they all kind of have this strange twilight state when you go back, where there's the lack of distinction between inner and outer reality. But with information processing, so alchemy. So even alchemy is one of these things because it's early chemistry, right? And it seems like this esoteric craft or this esoteric art. But what I've been learning is through analytical psychology and through Carl Jung, such a wonderful example, same thing as information processing theory, the way we used computers to start explaining the human mind. That's what alchemy is when you think about it psychologically. We've generated this craft that has a certain goal and it has a certain process. Just like information processing theory speaks about memory, alchemy speaks about the human psyche. I don't know, that just registered for me recently. I never realized that. It always seemed like such an esoteric field. But having read more of those old alchemists, the adepts, it's this wonderful understanding of what's happening in the mind. Just like astrology, you go into the past, it says more about the human psyche. What we think we're saying about the stars and this planet says more about us. And it's the same in many fields, including alchemy. And that's just been blowing my mind recently as sort of a fact. I have a lot more things to say, but I'm going to stop.
No, that's wonderful. And, we can come back to you and you can continue to share as soon as we go through and cycle these out. Yes?
I think one of the things we never talk about is the eye, what we see through our eye, because we use the word represent, but really the word is represent. And that's what the eye does for us. It represents things that we see. So I think that that's a really important factor also in these things that we talk about,
And we can follow up on that once everybody's given their 5-minute presentation. Yeah, let's definitely follow back up with that.
I have to say it right away, otherwise I'll forget it.
Oh, okay. So just maybe take a note, Aiden. And,
Yeah.
The thing I'll say quickly to that, just because it's such an important distinction, and I appreciate feedback because I'm kind of just wandering with my own thoughts here. But
sure.
What I like about this distinction, and it's this idea, I call it this: camera versus projector. Camera versus projector. It seems to me that the general human assumption is that we're taking things in like a camera. We see what's there and we're just representing it, right, in our mind's eye. Alternately, the very Jungian thing to also add to that conversation is we also function as a projector through the eye. It is a lens that things go in, and it's a lens through which things go out. So just like we take in what we think we're really seeing, in the same breath, the world becomes a screen, like a projector. I mean, in psychology, we talk about projection. The world becomes a screen onto which we project our own dramas, our own psyches, and images. So it's an interesting division. It's like on the one hand, we're taking information in. On the other hand, we're putting information out as to what really exists. That's my thought on that.
I'm going to jump in here because that's an amazing segue into what I wanted to talk about, which is unconscious bias. And this is
and you're next, so
yep.
That's perfect.
That's
perfect.
jumping in. This is kind of a philosophy that has been circulating recently in the corporate world due to what's happened with George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement, and sort of the increased focus on diversity and equity, that DEI movement. And it's basically what Aiden said, which is sort of understanding that you're not seeing the world 100% objectively. Everybody's got their own biases, and some of them can be like innocuous, sort of like I have a biases towards cats over dogs, right? I prefer cats. But some of them can be much more harmful, especially if they're not investigated and kind of dealt with. They're addressed. And those are where we're seeing sort of racial tensions, or like the Me Too movement, right? What is sexual harassment? What you kind of could perceive as like, that's not my intent. The impact is felt that way. And this disconnect is kind of coming from these biases and this programming that we've all been kind of indoctrinated in when we're growing up. Like, our society shapes how we see things, right? So because we're living in sort of, and I'm not trying to get sort of controversial here, but we do live in sort of a white male dominated world, right? And so that kind of sets the tone for how everybody who is in this society views that world. And I shouldn't say world, I should say like US society. I should talk a little bit more concisely. So it's easy to not really examine these biases or these sort of sparks that kind of make that quick choice, like that instantaneous choice of, hey, I see something, I think this is what's going on. Your brain makes that assumption based on all of the data that you have kind of experienced, have been exposed to in your past, what you've heard from your parents. All of that influences that one moment in time where, and you don't even realize it. It's not a conscious decision. It's going on in the back of your mind. And that's why it's kind of called an unconscious bias. And it's something that is hard to do, but the first step is kind of recognizing that, hey, everybody has these, they're okay, nobody's fault, there's no blame game for this. But if we're going to kind of unify more solidly as a society, it's kind of understanding and then kind of being willing to work through those. So that is my speech on it. And if you're curious about sort of what sort of biases you may have, Harvard's done this sort of study slash kind of test that you can kind of go take to identify what sort of implicit biases you may have. And they're, it's kind of along the spectrum or the axes of like race, gender, sexual orientation, and kind of other topics like that. Thanks for forcing me to do that, Joe.
No problem at all. No, and thank you for that contribution. I think that that's going to make for a great follow-up conversation, and I'm sure Aidan actually has a comment about that. I have Judith next.
Yeah, Nari, I'm glad you spoke about biases. It's really interesting. I think I missed the first person who presented, unfortunately. But so many of the things that I'm hearing brought up are things that have been on my mind. So Nari, you talked about biases. Aidan, you had talked about consciousness. That's been something I've been thinking about a lot, and dreams that I'm working on, and art as a connection. Kevin, you know, change and choices. So I just feel a lot of times we're very, very human centric from wherever we come from. And that's a bias in itself. So, you know, when I was a kid, when I learned, you know, that there were galaxies beyond our galaxy, and I just, you know, and possibly even universes beyond our universe, kind of blew me away. And then in the other direction, you know, when I learned, you know, that, you know, our bodies are broken down into these molecules, and then those are atoms, and then they're breaking them smaller. And I used to imagine you could go infinitely in either direction, small and big. So these opposites have always been sort of a theme. So sometimes when I try to separate myself from like getting really lost in, you know, the muddle of the ordinary things that we as humans always are worrying about, I think about Richard Feynman. He's a physicist, and I actually saw a quote from him recently, in the last week, where he was saying, you know, if you think that we are just on this speck of dust whirling around the sun among billions of suns, I'm kind of paraphrasing, trying to remember, you know, in our galaxy, among, I don't know how many galaxies, billions of galaxies, I don't know, you know, in the universe, it kind of blows your mind. And that's where this thought of opposite comes to me, because it's like, that makes us seem really insignificant. And then at the same time, really significant too, that we are comprehending this, unless it's just a projection that we are making together, I don't know. And the other thing is, there are like about 118 elements that we know of. They were all formed in stars. And humans have made a couple more elements, actually manufactured elements, but the entire universe, as far as we know, are just made of these 818 or so different elements. And they make up everything you see around you. I mean, that just blows my mind. And so when I think about how important I am or how great I am because I can think and I have a logical mind, you know, and what a wise humans are above everybody else, you know, but if you took the bacteria out of our bodies, you wouldn't survive. And if you didn't eat the carbon in your meal today, you know, you wouldn't survive. So we really need each other, which brings me to what Kevin says, which I think about a lot, is like, we seem to forget that aspect when we're busy trying to, you know, just live our lives. Like when you put your food on your table, if we appreciated this and understood that the food we eat that we can't live without is something that's made of carbon, that was alive, just like us, and it has its wisdom. It has a great wisdom. It knows how to photosynthesize. Okay. But we have control. We have control over our actions more than anything else. So humans have this huge potential, and that's a huge responsibility, how that's used. So then that brings me to, you know, that like I'm always fighting with these opposites, like what can the rational do? where does the mystical fit into this? You know, where is that? Where is this consciousness? Where does it exist? And what's part of it? That's why I asked that stupid question the other day, like, what is consciousness or the unconscious? You know, what is that? So, oh, and then one more thing I just want to add. So, right, the universe is mass and energy and all of that. So think about it. Like, I'm saying some words right now. So I'm moving some air molecules because I have a voice box and all this physical stuff, right? And we have technology we created so you can all hear it, but it goes into your brains and maybe it changes something, and then maybe it changes you. That's it. Energy changing something. I don't know. It's really powerful in my mind that can happen that way. You know, it's like amazing. So there's a whole bunch more things I could say, but these are the things I think about a lot because all the time anyway, but these are the things that these 52 living ideas, all the different meetups, I draw from them one way or another. Every single one talks about a different thing, but that's kind of where it feeds in, except right now I'm really about my dreams and art and where that fits and unconscious. But anyway, thank you.
No, I mean, I think that's, so thank you for sharing that. I mean, you know, one of the things, again, actually Aiden has covered is the unconscious, and we've covered extensively is the importance of mysticism, and as well as, you know, energy itself. But we can come back to that and after we get through the rest of our speakers here this evening. I have Jang next. How are you?
Good. How are you, Joe?
Good.
Yeah. So I want to agree with what Adam mentioned earlier, because you know, the information our brain is not really camera or our eye, because even the same information it's how we interpret it. You know, there's a saying in Chinese that 1 minute you could be in heaven, the next minute you could be in hell. So it's the same. You may be in the same situation. The way you're thinking or perceiving it can create totally opposite reality to you. So that's how powerful our mind could be. So that's what I want to comment, what I heard earlier, you know, how not in reality, but our mind play a big part in how we perceive lives. What I really want to share is what I learned from 52 Living Idea. I think one of the most important is recently the Japanese Zen master mentioned about how we each live our lives, come to the world one time, and how it's important for us to be ourselves in the whole lifetime. And I'm actually studying the book called Spirit Kids. Reading it got a lot of inspiration, and it really reinforced that idea. I think currently, the reason I'm reading it is because I have a son who's 12. I suspect he may have ADHD. I have a lot of challenges with school. I put him in private school, still have some challenges. And so I enrolled him in this nutrition program, and the nutritionist recommended this book, I think, for a lot of ADHD kids, and they call it Spirit Kids. It's very interesting. It's mentioned about how the kids are different. And the funny part, when I read this, I actually found a lot of things just like me. I was like, maybe I'm one of those. It's so funny. It's like, because it mentioned the kids actually very sensitive, and they have extreme emotions. So like, and they're like from very happy to very sad. So they have big spectrum of emotion. Like some people, they're like in the middle, they're very mild, and some kids are like up and down, up and down. And so for kids who don't learn how to control those emotions, could be, you know, damaging, or like, you know, people may complain. So it's very important. So that's why I joined a lot of group, and all these parents complaining. And I don't really want to, because the nutrition program is trying to use the food, kind of like use less sugar, all this to make their body healthy, so they don't really. And the very interesting thing I learned from this book is also mentioned about introvert, extrovert, how they recharge. And it's so true, because I'm very extrovert and my kids are introvert. And so my husband is in the middle. The funny thing they mentioned about how extrovert actually gain energy through communication with other people, and introvert they gain energy through stay alone by themselves. So they mentioned it's so true. Like when they go to party, I get more excited at the end of the party. So I don't want to leave. And my husband got exhausted. So we usually drive 2 cars and we just leave and I just hung out. And some people think it's weird. I was like, what's weird about that? You know? And he said, have a great time. I'm going home and rest. That's okay, great. So because I get more excited. At the end of party, it's like, oh, it just started. So I think I'm very extrovert. So I get all this energy through the interaction with people. And my kids, more introverts, I understand, like, you know, when I go to party, I can't stay too long, you know, or so they also mentioned how you arrange activities with other people because they don't like to with a big group of kids. And the funny thing, they mentioned actually when they have a party, they end up invite the whole neighborhood. That's what I usually do. You know, I start with like 2 or 3 friends and end up my birthday party because of COVID stopped. But before that, my party get bigger each year for my birthday because I invite all my friends and their friends get more and more friends. So like my house is filled with people. But anyway, so it's very interesting to learn, you know, how people function differently. But anyway, so maybe I shouldn't talk too long. But anyway, I just want to share. It's so important to know how each person functions,
So,
especially the kids.
Yeah, could you wrap it
Yeah,
up?
yeah. So I think that's a problem why we have to use medicine for kids when they can't control them, because we need to learn the right way to do it. Anyway, I'm totally against it, but I can't judge other people. But I just think, just like a race car, you know, some people are race car, you have to know how to control it. Otherwise, you're in the accident. But you can't punish the race car to be a race car because they're powerful. Anyway, I hope more parents educate themselves to deal with challenging kids because we learn so much of ourselves from that challenge and other people too. Thank you.
Thank you. So one thing I'm going to request is that everybody mute themselves if they're not the speaker, just as a way of making sure that everybody can hear clearly what the speaker is trying to communicate. So next I have Julie.
Okay. I hope this is 5 minutes or less.
Sure.
Can you hear me okay?
Sure.
Okay. I believe, I kind of wrote it down. I believe that children are naturally born in touch with their truth and authentic power. And in an ideal world, the soil around them would be encouraging and supportive of their growth and exploring their natural proclivities and flourishing as a beautiful flower would. Unfortunately, though, I believe it's a fear-based world, and we're born into this chaotic garden with a lot of weeds, and let alone the natural storms and droughts we might have to face. That ideally we would have a parent that might help us along. Ideally, we don't necessarily have that, and so. Sorry. So as a child, I think that we pick up beliefs and conclusions that end up being the bottom line of behaviors. Let's see, I'm on the right page. Okay. And not only that, we have like advertising and songs and all these lies that we need. To me, it seems like we spend a lot of adulthood trying to disarm lies that we bought into as a child, or that we formed beliefs as a child. And but as Les Brown says, at some point in time, if we're not happy with our situation, the first step we can do is take a look at what our part possibly that we might have had in creating part of the results that we're getting. And that's the beginning of waking up, because until then we have just a lot of chaotic people playing the blame game and looking outside for something that's an inside job, and we're never going to go anywhere. You just have a lot of people doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And so when we have I like Dr. Phil when he says, how's that working for you? because in that's a question that might be very appropriate for zillions of people watching daytime TV that aren't used to a question that leads to taking responsibility. And not only that, it actually kind of alludes to a choice to choose differently and create a different reality for yourself. And so with that willingness, we can start to take a look at what our part may be and how can we glean some lessons and some value from maybe behavior that wasn't maybe our best. Maybe we might need to get some feedback from someone else to find out how we might have contributed to this result that we didn't want. And at that point, we can, William James talks about whether something works for you or it doesn't. In my opinion, truth is really what ends up working. And in the long run, things that are based erroneously are not going to survive. They're not going to last. So alcoholism doesn't last. Things only work so long. And it's like the world is self-correcting in a kind way, and it teaches us, and we get, pushed up against the wall because something's not working in our life, and we need to take a look at it. And then we realize that we have a power to choose differently and find a belief that is more supportive to this flower. And so for example, and how does it work the other way? Well, as a child, you end up in chaos, maybe making some, I always say, I don't have children, but I say, don't let your child go to bed with a question in his head, because he might just come up with a conclusion that sets his trajectory in a bad place in life. And for me, it was something must be wrong with me. Others, it might be, oh, all women are bitches, or, oh, you better get them before they get you, or the nice guy finishes last, whatever it may be. Is it serving them? Choose differently. And how does it work that way? Because then your ego gets in there and finds all kinds of evidence to support this erroneous lie that you made up. See, there must be something wrong with me. See, all women are bitches. And selectively, you end up seeing the thing that supports this false belief. Course in Miracles helped me a great deal because it said people either are coming from love or fear, which is an appeal for love. I know myself, I have a Julie with a big J coming from love. And I have a very scared little girl in me who comes from fear. And I try, I'm trying to get to where I operate more off of Julie with a big J, but reality is very different from both those perspectives. And Course in Miracles says we're either extending love or projecting fear. One's a mentality of scarcity, one's a mentality of abundance. When I'm coming from Julie with a big J, I'm generous. I'm not worried about tomorrow. When I'm in fear, it's mine, 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 all mine. And I'm envious of your promotion. And it's just another side of me. So the bright side is that law of attraction also helped me because we are incredibly powerful. And law of attraction says that naturally we are love, and we are creativity. And naturally, if you had 10 people, they might have 10 visions for a building or an island or some creation. Unfortunately, in this world, 9 of them immediately would start looking at the lack of it in front of them and therefore draw the same kind of energy. But the one guy who keeps his vision, his eye on the vision, has the support of universes behind him. And one last thing, I used to, Course in Miracles talks about this too. There is a quantum physics is finding out that as we look at something, it changes. So, for example, if I expect the best to come out in you, I actually make it more likely that it will. And if I expect you to fumble up, I actually make it more likely that you will do that. So we have tremendous power. And I remember I was really resentful of this old man in these AA meetings that talked about newcomers coming in with their poor little wussies hurting. And I thought to myself, well, my poor little wussy hurts. But I watched this man, he was about 80, and he had such conviction about the light in his sponsees that was so steadfast that he just knew it was there, and he brought it out in these boys. And so we are much more powerful. For me, my journey is about taking back my power and coming back to getting rid of the fucking fear that makes me so self-concerned, self-conscious, so that I can get back into flow and be a channel for amazing energy that comes from, I don't know, divinity, creativity, inspiration, abundance, gratitude. And so on these calls, one last thing, my mother, she knew she wanted to sing. When my mom was in that element, I saw God all through her life. But she had 5 husbands, and she had issues. I believe that if you get into your gifts and doing what you're supposed to be doing, you don't even need to do the therapy. you don't even need to do the work because you're aligned with yourself. So I go on these calls to not only do the work to find out about myself, but also to find my purpose, in which case I won't have to do the work. Thank you.
Okay. So I will look at that takeaway as, basically how we develop as humans, and basically how we form our thoughts, and how we're essentially, our social worlds form our perspective on the world. I mean, I'm just trying to generalize what you were trying to communicate there, and we can come back to it as well. Next I have, I believe, Patricia.
Hi, thanks. I don't really have anything kind of organized to say, but one point I do want to make is I just want to say thank you to this community. It's been so powerful for me. I live by myself. I'm working from home. I work with elementary school children. So this is my adult conversation. I usually don't talk in the big group. In the smaller groups, I talk more, but I just really, this has been a great experience. It's reminded me of things that I learned about in the past and that interested me, and it sparked my curiosity and interest in moving forward. I think that for me, the second part I want to say is, I think that it's wonderful that we're all talking about these ideas. I'm more of a practical person. And as I said, I work with elementary school children. I'm working online. In the real world, I want to see how we translate it. How can I, like the meetings with the Center for the Study for Digital Life? I mean, it's a powerful topic, but every time I go to the meetings, I'm like, yeah, well, so what? What do I do as an educator to use whatever this limitations of digital media is in communicating with our children? How do I support, like Jean was saying about her son? A lot of my students, all my students have disabilities. So how are they responding? How am I going to meet their social emotional needs? And I think that for me, learning about myself, Aiden's group presentations have been wonderful in learning about the Myers-Briggs. I appreciate that. And just knowing, try to make myself a better person so that I can bring that to these kids. Because the students I work with, it's an elementary school in the Bronx, New York. So these are, it's a fairly decent neighborhood, but these are disadvantaged children. And I think that it's easy for us, we're in a position of privilege really here, most of us, and these children are not. And I think we're judging a lot of people and parents who really don't have the resources. These are great ideas, but how do we translate them into the everyday? I think that's just key, because it's a struggle I have every day, with these kids. But this has been very helpful for me, and I appreciate you all. So thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing. I will add that I do think that the Center for Digital Life offers quite a bit in the way of practicality, even though maybe the presentations come off as very philosophical. They offer a lot in practicality, specifically when you're talking about children with disabilities. How digital and how we interact with media, and how people with disabilities interact with media, it's profound. The impact is massive. So I think that not only it's how we interact with it, but it helps children that are autistic, because they feel like they're not being judged by the machine itself. So through iPad.
My students with autism, I have some who have just thrived in this environment. It's just been wonderful because they're able to meet their sensory needs and things like that. But along the lines with the Center for Digital Life, I just went to a workshop for children's and screens, and it's they brought up Marshall McLuhan, and I was like, wow, I know him from 52 Living Ideas. So they are trying to bring practicality to, digital literacy, as in, teaching children how to read in this digital world, and how literacy has changed. I have a lot of non-readers, but are they really non-readers? These kids can read a social situation very well. So how are we defining literacy? And isn't it a good idea for us to look at literacy differently, and how this medium and children being able to make a video of themselves is a better way for them to express themselves? So anyway, that's wonderful ideas that I've gotten from 52 Living Ideas and just from my everyday life. I mean, I'm an occupational therapist, so that, makes me a practical person. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And I don't believe we have anybody left, any more speakers left. So from that perspective, we can kind of start to revisit some of the themes that we've discussed. And welcome back, Shrikant.
Hi. So I'm back. Thank
Thank you
so much for this. Really,
I'll tell you what, if I could give you a hug through the screen, I would actually do it.
Wonderful. So do you guys want to do breakout rooms? I can do breakout rooms now if you want. Joe, what do you think?
Well, I think we should maybe establish what some common themes are that we discussed.
Oh, perfect.
And once we do that, we could possibly do some breakout rooms, or we can just continue the conversation from here.
Sounds good.
So Jody really spoke about the idea of form follows function. So she really covered that nicely. And actually, does anybody want, let me try to do the power of crowds here. Does anybody wish to share what they saw as a theme throughout this meetup that they would like to discuss further? Feel free to type exclamation point in the chat. If not, then we can go through what people discussed. Okay. And Kevin brought up a really interesting thing as to that also relates to the Center for Digital Life and Change. So that was very interesting as well. Nari and Judith both discussed bias specifically, how we form our biases and what the impact of those biases are. Aidan, actually, do you want to just give a line about yours? Because you discussed alchemy, perception, and form follows function, and you hit so many areas. I was wondering if you could maybe just put one sentence succinct that we could revisit.
Well, I was just typing in the chat. It's funny. I was just typing in the chat things that I heard that jumped out at me.
Sure.
In terms of where we find value, subjectivity, the heritage of consciousness, biases, in particularly unconscious biases. I like this idea of the tension of the opposites, the bigness versus smallness. What is the what is consciousness versus unconsciousness question is very interesting.
Yeah.
Spirited kids versus ADD. I mean, I have lots of thoughts and a lot of wonderful topics. The ADD topic, and Julie brought up the flower who we're supposed to become versus how we get off track. very interesting. I mean, a lot of really incredible topics. So I'm at a loss in terms of where to go. And hi,
Okay.
Srikant. Welcome.
So yeah, some of the other topics that were related to actually ADD and learning, which kind of focuses on human development and gets to some of the very key discussions that we had, I think, in the past on Comprehensivist Wednesdays, related to how even specialization fits into that, how we're childlike and we're interested in things, and that at certain points in our lives we seem to lose interest and become specialized, which is the opposite of comprehensivism. So there was an element of that was discussed as well. As childhood development was part of that, and it actually goes into one of Sanjay's talks about childhood development that he had given neurologically. I'm trying to think.
The ADD thing, if I can jump in on that just quickly,
Sure.
because something on that topic that's very interesting is the spirited child thing. I don't know much about. I'll have to look into that. But interestingly, I've become more familiar recently with Gabor Mate. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but Gabor Mate, who wrote Scattered Minds. And he has a very interesting point of view about this, which is that it's ADD has this sort of categorical existence for us, that it's sort of like something that people have. And he would argue with that in the sense that he conceives of ADD, and he, by the way, considers himself, somebody who struggles with this, it's a dynamic. ADD is an experience of a dynamic. In other words, it's a process-driven thing, and it's a dynamic-driven thing. It's not a categorical thing that we have. In other words, we have this sort of sense of, he quotes another psychiatrist who says, in psychiatry, we talk about categories. We don't talk about the experience of pain. The experience of pain, we say this person has this categorical problem, instead of the sort of phenomenological aspect of the living dynamic experience. Anyways, he brings that into ADD, and it's really fascinating, and especially as it pertains to early life, because it ties into the Jungian thing, which you won't be surprised I bring this up. But Jung had a very similar idea of Gabor Mate, which is to say early environment is a dynamic environment, and it's where we internalize our conception of the world, including ourselves. So the dynamic of early encounters becomes introjected, or at least internalized to some degree. So you could say that's a dynamic structure that gets internalized. It's not really a categorical thing. So anyways, I wanted to say that.
That's fascinating, actually. The taking a phenomenological approach to ADD would be actually, I think, much more beneficial than taking the approach that we have as far as categorical, where we start to just shift people into categories and assign values to them. That's a really fascinating topic in and of itself, and the Jungian psychology aspect of it would be very interesting. You could possibly do a topic on that.
Well, it becomes a slippery slope, and I don't want to say this for people who are parents or necessarily working with children. I recognize the danger of what I'm about to say, but the Jungian point of view is to say, what's happening in the dynamic in the household that would stir a child to act in a certain way, because where did ADD come from? I mean, it's sort of a modern problem, right? So it's not like the increase in diagnoses is not because suddenly it doesn't make sense, other than to say that there's some sort of a well, I've kind of lost my train of thought about this, but you could say with Jung, for example, if he had a child that came in, he didn't see children, but if a parent complained about a child, his first thing, especially if the child seemed truly neurotic, would be able to say, well, what's happening with the parents? The first thing he would say, because he would say, what dynamic is happening that would precipitate a challenging expression through the child. And imagine if we took that stance, as a culture, right? If we said, okay, all these children that we might point to as having certain problematic behaviors, if we looked at ourselves to say, which I'm sorry for not knowing all the names, that somebody spoke to this, I think Jeng, or but you could say, if we took a reflective stance as to say, how are we precipitating this reality, it would be quite different than to say, oh, well, categorically, I'm going to diagnose you with this, and now here's prescription drugs. I mean, it's a totally different approach to that problem.
Right.
But just a little bit of a rant. But I'm just very excited. Also, like somebody else shared the gratitude for having this community, because I have not been terribly social lately. So this is a joy for me to just listen and talk, and I'm enjoying it.
You know,
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
ADD has become like, you know, when a parent has a kid who acts out a lot and so forth, immediately they want to define their kid as having ADD because it's an excuse for bad behavior. And parents don't want to admit to that behavior at home a lot. They just say, oh, my child's not like that at home, you know. So
Well, before we go further, let's see what Shirkan, where do you want to maybe take this?
I missed all of this.
Okay.
So I want a quick recap so we can look at everything, so that we can use me as a guinea pig to say, okay, the whole, you know, it's like, what is it that I missed? So I think you were in the process of kind of going through, and you talked about what Jyoti said about form follows function.
And kindergarten chats, yeah.
Yeah, Kevin talked about the Center for Digital Life. Several people talked about biases. Jean talked about ADD. Who was that? It was Julie who talked about, you know, the child growth of flower. Who else talked, and what did they talk about?
Well, Aiden had spoken, and he had actually connected to form follows function, and as also our perception, how we perceive things, and specifically about alchemy. And let me see what else here. Julie, again, you were here for that, right?
Yep, okay. I caught that on my way home.
Jean did speak about let me see, ADD. And Patricia also spoke about people with disabilities and making things practical with the Center for Digital Life. Nari spoke about our biases as well and how they're formed. And that's all I have at the moment.
All right, so there are four big themes that seem to come out from this. And maybe we can go one by one, and, you know, we can just put that on the table. And let's see what people have to say. So one is form follows function. Second is Center for Digital Life. Anything about that? Third is biases. And fourth is kind of childhood development. What do you guys think? So we can just talk about it one by one. And anybody who wants, they can put their thought on the table. What do you guys think? Okay. Makes sense, Joe?
Yes, sounds good to me.
Okay. So let's start with the Center for Study of Digital Life. What do you guys think? Several of you have attended meetups. What did you have to say? What do you, if you have any questions?
And perhaps I should clarify just a little bit about what Kevin had covered. Is like he basically had talked about, can we control where we're going in life, and what are quality of life metrics for human beings? Those were his two specific questions that he posed to the group. But he went through the idea of evolution, and then he mentioned some things about the invention of the computer and digital within that. So I thought that actually mapped closely to some of the stuff that we've done with the Center for Digital Life. So that maybe clarifies the question a little bit.
Sure.
And Kevin, feel free to offer any additional.
I think Kevin is no longer here.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, you're here? Oh, there's another screen. Oh,
yes, boss. I wait for you.
Yes, Kevin. Kevin, so can you put it as questions so everybody can answer them? Just put as crisply as possible.
Yeah. Just give me 30-second brief, like basically I inspired by take for granted. So I mentioned it, let's see, back to 270 years ago about alpha, like alphabet. Where's come from this letter? It's just totally different. They all originating from ox. Why? A question from that angle. Why come from ox head, not other animal or something? Even these days, I know even in Indian, let's say holy cow, right? That's we still, the cow is a big part in our life. Yes, and and follow. Then I put let's say even further back. Let's back to the 270 years ago. Talk about the Peking man, basically Stone Age. They use stone as tools. They already know which stone this is 10 degree of which one is soft. They can build tools, cut the animal and tree. Okay.
Kevin, what I was hoping for was a question which
Okay,
everybody could give their
here.
thoughts on. So can you formulate it as a question or maybe a couple of questions?
Yes.
Oh, there it is. Can we control where we are going to? That's excellent. And what are the quality of life matrix for human beings? Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
How do we, let's see, decide the matrix? One more question for.
That's good. These two questions are great. They're fantastic questions, Kevin. Let people answer them.
Yep.
All right. So anybody has any thoughts about what are the quality of life metrics for human beings? And can we control where you are going to? Any thoughts? You can go ahead and type exclamation mark. So first thing I want to say, this is actually the thought of, one of the core thinkers behind the Center for Digital Life is Marshall McLuhan. His ideas are like the foundation. And he thinks about this all the time. He thinks about that what happens is that different ages focus on different things. And when we go to the next age, a next technology, it kind of enhances one particular aspect, but many times it displaces other things. So for example, take the revival of myths now through people like Jordan Peterson, right? Or Carl Jung. That's something which was actually the mainstay when in the oral culture, a while ago, or during the mythic culture. That was the predominant way in which people made sense of things. And by pushing science, which is fantastic, which allows us a level of precision of thought, which was actually missing, so it adds something, but you lose that. So when you're thinking about the matrices, one of the very simple way of doing that and of grounding it is to familiarize yourself with the past of where human beings have been. And the requirements that we had, the needs that we had at a previous stage are still there. So how, and you can actually bring back some of those things where McLuhan calls it retrieval, which is a very important pattern of growth. So another way of looking at the matrices is that you can look at like these different ages and say, okay, what was really good about it? And say that you want it all. And then how do you kind of come up with combinations of things that, so Joe, is it okay if I do the moderating?
Sure, please do.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's going to be Joe, Aiden, and Nari. Joe.
To the first question, the idea of metrics, of the coming up with something that would be a way of measuring human progress, I believe was the exact question. This is something that I thought a lot about lately, is that we often use metrics only in financial terms, economic metrics. And what is GDP? What are we producing? What's the price of goods? And we look at that as a form of progress. And while that is a form of progress, it's not the only form of progress. And I think one of the interesting things that in past meetups, to link it to past meetups that we've attended or you've hosted here. One of them was with your good friend Spencer Greenberg, and how he uses metrics, and he's gathering data about habits and even things about people who are degrees of happiness. I believe he's also capturing people, the number of people in depression within a country, and how they even measure those things. I think that those are actually very helpful metrics to measure the progress of a society. I mean, because I think that by just relying on financial terms, there's an element of discontent that you are actually relying on, because you can't be satisfied because you need to consume more, if you think about it. So the idea of growth is just nothing more than consumption. So I think as far as a human metric, I think that that's a really interesting point. We should probably look at things as, well-being. And it's interesting to see also how, and this is something that, Sanjay actually would know better than myself, is that how brain studies and people who self-identify with these, brain studies, that they're actually doing brain images. So if you identify as lonely or depressed, they're actually able to, look at your scans and tell that you are, the way you react to certain images, depressed or lonely and things along those lines. And I think that that's important because that makes it a little bit more of something that you can measure. Because if people are able to self-identify accurately, then that would make something, I would imagine, like Spencer's database much more powerful. So I think that that's just one metric that I would go off of as one example. I could go on to the Center of Digital Life, but I'll let other people go.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Aiden, followed by Nari. Aiden.
Awesome. Thanks, Shrikant. I love this topic of metrics. That's the question that I'd like to answer, is quality life metrics for human beings. I think from the Jungian point of view, there's always a challenge when we talk about concepts, because there's a movement towards uniformity and a movement away from phenomenology or outliers and these kinds of things. In other words, distinctions are less emphasized and uniformity is more emphasized in any sort of abstract conception. So I'm sort of admitting that, entering into this topic in the first place. That being said, I think that values have, like a lot of ideas in depth psychology, an inner corollary and an outer corollary. I'm a little bit dovetailing on what you were saying, Shrikant. But there is an outer collective value system that we live in. It does involve money, and it does involve status and prestige and these kinds of things, where we take on this idea of value as we inherit it culturally, how we're supposed to be and what value looks like, and we sort of take that on for ourselves. In other words, external value that we internalize. On the other hand, from the depth psychology point of view, and this is what I love that you brought up myths, Shrikant, it's an inner value. It's the stuff that comes from inside of us, and so we, just like we take external values and bring them in, we take our internal values and take them out in terms of mythology and religion, whatever the case may be, anything that corresponds with internal values. So I would say the easiest metric for that, and this is a funny phrase given my world, would be meaning. Meaning would be the main criteria of the inner value. And you would say, whatever you're living outwardly and whatever culture you have, that you've adopted the ideas of external values into yourself, where it becomes problematic. And this is like the metric of quality of life. How aligned is it with your true inner sense of who you are and what really matters and what really moves you? And this is something that's very phenomenologically focused. So you can only say each individual can really only decide that for themselves, because it's an experience. But the experience, as I conceive of it, is the experience of meaning that's sort of the metric that I could think of. But this is a very exciting topic, and
wow, Aiden, that was wonderful. I mean, I think that's very true. I mean, I think Jordan Peterson has done a fantastic job on that. You know, he has an entire book called Maps of Meaning, which talks about, because it's a concept that goes across your state. It doesn't matter, you know, it's like your life keeps changing, your external keeps changing, your internal keeps changing. But this meaning actually has meaning at every point of time. It keeps transforming, but it's not random. It has a certain, integrity to it. The other thing I wanted to say is that people like Carl Jung, people like Aristotle, you know, many of these thinkers are holistic thinkers, where they bring together, they look at human being as an integrated being, and they are naturally evaluating all of these things. And they will encourage you to do that, both outer and inner, your thinking and your feeling, your sensation and your intuition, whichever way you want to put it, just make them all work, yourself and society. Make all of these things work. So it's an integrated perspective. Nari. I would hear you better if you were unmuted.
If I was unmuted. Yes, thank you very much for that, Shrikant. Something I have learned, taken away from 52 Living Ideas, is to unmute myself when I want to discuss something. I wanted to say, Aiden, I think it's really funny that I'm following you a lot tonight, because I feel like we have a lot of the same sort of ideas and concepts. I wanted to bring in the discussion that we had on Saturday, Shrikant, with Yasuhiko Kimura, and like what he was saying about authenticity. And I would love to use that as like my metric for how the quality of life for human beings, how we can kind of measure that. Because if we are in a society where people are able to be authentic to themselves, then I think that we have truly reached like progress, right? We're in a place where people aren't kind of defined or constrained by external society, like the outside and people telling us what we should do, but really kind of trusting in every person's kind of right and morality to kind of be able to determine that for themselves and act accordingly. Like the way that our society is right now is very low on trust. And because of that, you know, there's going to be people acting out against it and kind of breaching that trust, or like reacting to that lack of trust, I should say.
Wonderful. All right, so let's take the next topic. Form follows function. Is anybody familiar with it, or any kind of questions, any kind of thoughts that you would like to put together? We want to first put kind of questions. Kevin, what's your question about form follows function?
How about opposite way? Function, how function affect forms? Like you got to, power on other side should be both way. So it's not unidirectional, I would say. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else wants to? I'll go ahead and answer that question, because that's a very fundamental question. I mean, the way in which this is the idea of Louis Sullivan. Jean, go ahead.
Yeah, as architect, we learned some of Louis Sullivan and form follow function. I think that's a modern architecture kind of character. To me, actually, I think it's very similar to what talking about integrity of human being, be authenticity. Like form follow function, exactly. The building expresses itself functionally with the form. So it's very true to itself. So that's, to me, is express the same as human being. How can we be authentic? If human, just like Louis Sullivan mentioned, if the architect is truthful, then he will design a truthful building. So if people are not truthful, they cannot. Think about the previously, every building is decorated, and hiding, but they cannot express their true self. Same, so they should reflect in the building. So in the new modern age, they try to let the building be simple, show their function, and still be beautiful, just be themselves. I think that's what I mean.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I want to make a couple of observations. I mean, this is a very deep idea. I'm a big fan of Louis Sullivan, and we're doing this series on Saturday at 2:30, and it's just out of the world because I've got two architects, Sherry and Rupali, who are like who provide the pillars, and in the middle of the arc, I've got Maritza and Joya, who are like, Joya is like a literary person who talks about the literary characteristics of Louis Sullivan. And then Maritza is reading it for the first time, so you can, and she's completely excited about it. So it's like, it's a wonderful chorus of presentation of this idea. But this is a very deep idea. See what it is that we are living beings, so we are living. So we are basically functions. We're trying to do things. But in order to live, we create forms to carry out those functions. And that's what Louis Sullivan means, that form follows function. So the form is trying to match that. But at the same time, what happens is that it's actually hard work to produce a form. And most people grab onto the forms and they just live by the forms, whether it is the traditions that they grew up with. This is how things are supposed to be done. They don't really ask, why? What is this doing? It applies to words. You know, you look at somebody who really knows words like Shakespeare, and the way in which words work in such a mind. I mean, it's really profound. It's living, and it has profound impact when he speaks. We use the same words in a mechanical way, so we lose that. So this is a huge, huge concept. And what happens is that if you don't watch out, the forms that you adapt actually makes your function go a certain way, in a certain direction. So it actually constrains your function, and it kills it actually, because it's no longer living. It is doing something, but it is flowing according to the forms. This is true even when the form was spectacularly good when it was first designed, because you have to be true. I mean, for example, you know, Aiden was talking about meaning. You have to be true to your own meaning and see whether what you're doing matches that. Even the fact that you yourself came up with the form may turn out to be that, okay, now you've gone past it and you're trying to hold on to it. So this is a huge, deep topic. And I definitely recommend Louis Sullivan. As I keep telling people, first time I discovered it, I bought like 32 copies and gave it to everybody. So I'm that big fan of Louis Sullivan. Patricia, followed by Laura. Patricia, what do you think?
I had a question for you, Shrikant, because I'm not really familiar with Louis Sullivan and the form follows function. How does that relate to McLuhan's the message is the medium? Okay,
beautiful, beautiful question. See, to connect those two is again Marshall McLuhan's, you know, he's brilliant at coming up with these sentences. So he says, we shape our tools and then our tools shape us. Okay, so this is equivalent of, you know, there is a function, you create the form, and then the functions flow through that form, so it shapes functions. So the idea that medium is the message is that medium is a certain form. If you consume that form, so for example, TV, right? TV lends itself to passivity of being overwhelmed by all your senses. All your senses are overwhelmed by somebody else's imagination producing something which you're taking it as given passively. Now, if you do that on a regular basis, if you consume that media on a regular basis, your psyche is going to become a certain way. And that is going to spill into everything else you do. Contrast that to writing. Writing is a much more active thing. It is something, you write something down, it allows you to be self-reflective. You can organize your thoughts. So you do that 4 hours a day, the way your mind works is different. That's what McLuhan means by medium is the message. And this is the connection between, you know, function creating forms and then forms shaping the functions. So there is a back and forth relationship. between forms and functions. And functions are changing all the time, and forms are changing all the time. Functions are operating on the base of a much greater kind of chorus of functions which are operating in the background, of which the function that you're looking at is there. So you have to understand the entire kind of hierarchy and this dance of functions and forms. And that's what it is about. Laura. Patricia, does that answer the question, by the way?
Yeah, it does. And I just wanted to mention to you, I read a great article today that you would love, and it was about how writing your notes is so much superior to digitally writing your notes, and how it reinforces learning on 3 different levels. And it made me think of you. So
wonderful.
You're right on.
Thank you. I'm a big fan of writing. Laura, what's your question or a comment about form follows function, and then Aiden?
Okay, just from my perspective, I feel you have a form and you operationalize it by a function, and it goes form, function, and so forth. But I see it that way rather than the way, and that's the mathematical way in me. And I don't know if it's right or wrong to do it that way, but that's the way my mind sees it. And I also believe in writing by hand, absolutely. Makes such a difference. But anyway, that's my note. And yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Aiden.
Cool. This is so fun. And I don't know this topic, so I'm going to have to start joining because my curiosity is so very seriously piqued. I put a screenshot that I just took for this group into the chat. There's a Jungian version of this idea, I think, if I'm catching it correctly, but from the standpoint of personal development. And I'm going to give you an example. I'll just read it for this group because it's short, but I'll be curious particularly to hear your thoughts, Shrikant, or if this lands in regards to what we're talking about. This is in the context of self-realization and transformation that can happen in the religious experience, or what today we would probably call the spiritual experience. But here's the story, right? There was once an old man who lived in a cave where he sought refuge from the noise of the villages. He was reputed to be a sorcerer, and therefore he had disciples who hoped to learn the art of sorcery from him, but he himself was not thinking of any such thing. He was only seeking to know what it was that he did not know, but which he felt certain was always happening. After meditating for a very long time on that which is beyond meditation, he saw no other way of escape from his predicament than to take a piece of red chalk and draw all kinds of diagrams on the walls of his cave in order to find out that which he did not know what it might look like. Eventually he hit the circle and said, "That's right." And then he put a quadrangle inside of it and said, "That's even better." And his disciples were curious, but they could all make out that he was up to something, and they wanted to know what he was doing. So they asked him, "What are you doing?" But he didn't tell them. They found the diagrams on the wall and said, "That's it." And they all imitated the diagrams. But in so doing, they turned the whole process upside down without noticing it. I think this is the form component of it. They anticipated the result in the hope of making the process repeat itself, which had led to that result. And this is how it happened then and how it still happens today. That's the Jungian.
Absolutely. Beautiful, beautifully put. That's exactly what it is. The thing is that, like, people who actually create great things, they have a function that is creating that. And people look at it, even those people who are very impressed by what that person is and the product, and they take that product and start worshiping it. Moment you do that, you actually are putting yourself down. You know, you're forgetting what actually made that what it is. And so you kind of, and worse, typically it is worse than that. Typically, all people want to do is to say, "Look, I have this." They want to show it to others, saying that, "Look, I have this." Okay, so it is kind of pretending to yourself and to others that you actually have the cause when you simply have just grabbed the effect from somebody else. So there's all kinds of interesting stuff, but fantastic example, Aidan. Next up is Jean.
Yeah, this is fascinating because I was thinking about this similar idea about media and message. You know, for example, people are just so easily obsessed with media or form than the real message or the real function behind it. I remember I read this article about, for example, telephone. They used to have cell phone in China, this huge brick-sized cell phone. And because it's so rare, become like a symbol of status. So people just carry it around to show off. And it's like, and it's no longer the function itself. It's the media itself become a symbol. And people are so obsessed. And another movie, I'm not sure anybody watched it, called Raise the Red Lantern. It's about this old commercial guy have, you know, businessman in old China, had many wives. And every night he go to one courtyard, he reads the red lantern. So he's going there and everybody want the red lantern. And the red lantern is just the media. But people, and this woman end up to do the red lantern herself. It's just so interesting how people are so easily grab to the media or the form and forget about the function. So for architecture as well, you know, I think the reason they mentioned about, for example, the most famous architect, Louis Kahn, and Louis Kahn's building cannot be copied because their form, there's nothing special about the form, but it's all the space. And Anne Pei actually is designed this hotel in Beijing, and he had used some simplified Chinese, you know, culture form things, and everybody copied it because form is so easy to copy. But the meaning and Louis Kahn is a poet. He's the most powerful architect if you want to study architecture. So he created the Campbell Art Museum. He's about light, about space. Nobody can copy. So it's so hard to, I visit his building. I just obsessed how people, just the reason we are obsessed with form and the media because it's physical. It's so easy compared to the other one. It's more abstract. It's hard to grasp.
Yeah, that's excellent. Another way of looking at it, again, using Marshall McLuhan's ideas, is that when it's the function that is pushing things forward, and forms, moment you kind of start create a form which actually is amazing in the first, then it gets copied. It's like pushing that function to a limit, and then the function itself starts to die, and you're just surrounded by a lot of that form. So that's what McLuhan calls like reverses. So it's the same thing that actually makes success. Now suddenly it becomes like the thing that is actually killing the same thing that it produces. But all right, so the next one is, I think we'll do one more. And I think, Joe, I think looks like many people talked about the childhood growth. Let's see what time it is, 10:48. So any kind of, let's do a lightning round. How about that? What is the most profound question we can ask about childhood growth? I like the way in which Julie put that, of saying that there is a flower and it requires a certain ground for it to flourish. And if it doesn't get the ground, then it's not going to grow very well. So any thoughts about, if you have, now this is lightning round, we're coming to the end. So lightning round, any thoughts about the right way of looking at childhood development? Because, you know, all of us agree that children are amazing creatures. And really, we also know that a lot, you know, most of the education system really kills that amazingness in them. No matter what it ends up giving, what it kills is much larger than that. So any thoughts? Just 1 to 3 sentences or so. Just lightning round. Jean, what's your lightning round?
Yeah, I think it's important, not uniformity. I think the education try to make every kid the same. That's why some people are too special, they cannot fit in. Then they become the problem.
Thank you. Joe.
I think the challenge is what Jane has just mentioned, is there's a high degree of conformity. that is expected in schooling, that limits and makes a child's view narrow of the world. And this narrowness turns into specialization, which ultimately leads to a lot of difficulties in seeing, finding out what you're best at, but also seeing what is the entire big picture when you're trying to solve a problem. Take a systems theory approach to problems.
Thank you, Joe. Next up is Laura, Julie, and Nari. Laura, what's your?
Okay. Let me get myself on here.
Go ahead.
Okay. I would say that school leads to mediocrity, and that would be like if you don't give the flower enough water and the soil becomes dry. And I would say when you give it too much water, you drown it, and that's where there's over attention, and that may not be from school, but by Uber parents. So I think that's the problem we have right now. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Julie, what do you think?
I think if we cultivate their natural gifts, allow them to explore what they want to explore and get them living from that place, the rest of it takes care of it itself, because when they're coming from that place, they're in flow and the fear isn't there and they're naturally in touch with their own alignment.
Thank you. Nari, Aiden, and Joe. Nari.
I think my point kind of falls along the lines of what everybody else was saying, which is that we kind of cultivate this general idea of not to ask questions, or to ask the questions that we want you to ask, and not necessarily explore kids' own curiosity. And that leads us to a society where people can't think for themselves, or they're always looking to somebody else for the answer.
Excellent. Next up is going to be Aiden, Joe, and Patricia. Aiden.
Yeah. So lightning round version of this is hard, but I would say in brief, the Jungian point of view is that the most influential thing on the child, the most from Jungian point of view, is the unlived life of the parent. That which the parent is not aware of, that is the most powerful influence on the life of the child. So the Jungian point of view, the emphasis is the self-education of the educator, or the self-awareness of those who are around children, because through that authenticity, integrity, all these things we talked about today, by analogy, a person who lives their life with those values is analogously in the best position to do that for new life.
Wonderful. Thank you, Aiden. That was fantastic. Next up is Joe and Patricia. Joe.
That was really, really powerful. I mean, and I'm just going to expand briefly on what Nari had said. The idea that we incentivize kids to answer questions, not to ask them. And that kills creativity, so that they think that there's an answer that's already prepackaged. And that's the only thing I wanted to add on to that.
Wonderful. Next up is Patricia.
Just from the perspective of an educator at in the largest school system in the country, it's not easy to do, but we are making an effort, and it's called problem-based learning, where we're presenting a problem to the children and they need to solve it. Instead of giving them the information, they need to figure it out. So there is a movement in that right direction, even on a large scale.
Wonderful. I want to again bring up Marshall McLuhan, because he's so, I've just discovered him, and he's just so profound. So for example, his take was that he's saying, look, we are in New York City. What is this thing about putting kids in this inside one room and expecting that they will learn there? They should go, all the knowledge is outside. At most, you can give questions inside and then let them go out, because that's where all the knowledge is, and figure it out.
There is a whole system of, the city as learning.
Yes,
where
city
we're
is learning.
trying to
That's
get
his
them.
idea. That's his idea. Yes.
And so it's very important.
Yeah.
And to Aiden's point, in occupational therapy, one of our tools is, we call it therapeutic use of self. And it is so essential for parents, educators to be aware of their own issues and what they're bringing, because the relationship is where a lot of the learning happens.
Wonderful. Laura, you had a quick comment? Nope. Okay. All right. Okay, folks. So firstly, Joe, thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you in New York soon.
I know, and I look forward to being in New York soon. And I want another shot at actually hosting one of these. I think I could do it a little better.
No, I thought Joe does a fantastic job. You know, his style is very different from mine. He lets people talk, which I don't. No, I'm just kidding. No, but it's like, you know, his standards are different, but I think he's far more personable than I am, and he's able to kind of listen to people better than I can. So I think it's wonderful to have him host. And so, Joe, anytime you want to do that, just you're always welcome. And
I just want to say thank you to you and this whole community. It's nothing short of a blessing for me every single evening. Yeah, everybody.